Hey, this is Kirk, the Bariatric Carnivore. Well, there's a couple of different types of fat that you may be aware of. One of them is the subcutaneous fat. That is the pinch an inch around your waist type stuff. This is the stuff that we're probably most concerned about when we're trying to get into a bathing suit. It's the part that's most visible. Strangely enough, though, it's not particularly dangerous for your overall health. It is very possible to be fat, but yet be healthy. It's a peculiar subset of people that are fat yet healthy, and you can be metabolically healthy with lots of subcutaneous fat. There's another type of fat, though, that is very dangerous, and that is the visceral fat. And this is the internal fat that goes around your organs. This is the part that is most metabolically active. I keep reading the literature, and it's linked directly to poor metabolic health. Now, whether it causes it or it is a result of poor metabolic health, but basically, the insulin in the body is really what's creating this, and this is what creates fatty liver. It starts to surround your intestines, your stomach, your heart, etc. And the visceral fat is the truly dangerous stuff. You can have some, you don't have to have six-pack abs and you can be very healthy. But man, if you've got visceral fat, you got fatty liver and stuff like that, you're in danger, metabolically speaking, because it does have its own effect on the organs. It creates this bad cascade of negative health effects and it's linked to not only heart disease but also Alzheimer's, many types of cancers, etc., type 2 diabetes. It's very problematic. So you don't want it, and the problem is that it is possible, just as possible as it is to have a lot of subcutaneous fat and be healthy, it is possible to be thin but unhealthy. It's called TOFI, thin on the outside, fat on the inside, and that is the visceral fat that takes over the organs. People of Asian extraction, Indian, Japanese, etc., this is the type of, where they may look relatively thin. They don't look, like they're oozing with fat on the outside, but it's all on the inside. And this is one of the reasons why there's so many people in India with type 2 diabetes. Even though you don't see that many people that look morbidly obese like they do in the United States, they've still got this type of fat on the inside, and it creates tremendous strain on the organs and creates a horrible cascade of metabolic events. Now the question is, okay, how do I know if I've got this visceral fat because I can't see it? Well, there's a couple different ways. One of them is through imaging studies, and you can do the CT scan or an MRI. MRI is probably the biggest gold standard if you can get one. And go to Sean Amara's site, and he's got links to be able to get that done. But there's other ways of checking it too. So, and by the way, the MRI study for visceral fat is probably also it's the best, but it's also the most expensive. The next down the road would be a DEXA scan, which is a low dose X-ray. It doesn't create a lot of radiation for the body. It is somewhere between $100 and $200 depending on who the provider is and where you're located. But there's different places around, plus mobile units at different. If you go to a low carb expo, there's usually somebody there that is willing to offer a special deal using their mobile systems to do a DEXA scan. And it's not a bad thing to do every now and then, because it's kind of a cool study to be able to look at your body and to see where your bone density is, how much muscle, how much fat you've got on your body, including the visceral fat. So it's not a bad thing to do if you can afford to do it. But there's another low-cost alternative. Another one that's out there that you may have been inundated by Hume Body Pod ads and other things like that, and that's the water impediments test. They're not as accurate as the imaging studies, but they're not bad as far as getting a pretty rough indication as to where you are at the moment. So it's not bad, but again, a body pod is still a couple $100. Not everybody wants to spend that much money to figure that type of information out, but it's available. The cheapest way to do it, and one that's kind of remarkably accurate, just involves a scale and a tape measure. And I'm including the link to a thing where you take your measurements and you include them into their calculator, and it's a pretty darn accurate thing. They've tested it against imaging studies to see if this is an accurate measure. So it's not as accurate as the imaging studies, but it's not bad, and it's not a bad way of testing yourself to see where you are and how much visceral fat you've got. And it just involves two measurements. One of them is around your waist, midway between your navel and your lowest rib, and you measure there and you get it in centimeters. And if you don't know how to calculate centimeters, Google it. It will tell you what the inches are into centimeters, and you plug that into the calculator, and it requires your weight and one more measurement around the thickest part of your upper thigh. And you take those measurements and you put them in there, and it will give you a pretty good indication as to how much visceral fat you are actually carrying right now, which is important information. Because visceral fat, again, is highly dangerous. It is metabolically unhealthy. This is, your number one indicator that you've got fatty liver disease, etc. And if you want to get rid of it, come back in 2 days, because I will talk about how to get rid of visceral fat in the next video. So this is kind of a two-part series. Part one is what visceral fat is and how to find out if you have it. And if you've got it, be back in 2 days and we'll talk about how to get rid of it. This is Kirk, the Bariatric Carnivore. I try to put out a couple messages each week. If you like this message, please hit like and subscribe. Join this channel of other like-minded folks. I will talk to you again soon.